welcome to this event where we're sharing some of our family history, which for a lot of you here will also be your family history in one shape or form. I'd like to say a very big thank you to my family who are here today, who some of you have already met. My son Peter, sister Teresa, my cousins Maciek and Vitek, who are also very much part of the story because it's their mother, my mother's sister, who is also talked about in the book. And my daughter Rose, thank you very much Rose, she's doing some of the media for us. Also a very big thank you to Kresy families for helping to support us, and to POSK as well. So yes, this story I think will feel familiar to a lot of you. I hope that in today's presentation you'll get a feel for some of the style of the book, the historic setting which the book sets forward, I think, very, very clearly. And I hope that it brings some of the characters to life for you. Some of the people who asked to join today are some of my mother's pupils from Divine Mercy College from Fawley Court, who are scattered across the world. So it's an absolute honour to have them here today joining us, as well as having all of you here today. The story begins at the beginning of the Second Polish Republic, very soon after the Polish-Soviet War. And we're located here in the little provincial town of Mołodeczno in today's Belarusia. And as you can see, it is very uncomfortably close to the border with the Soviet Union. And it's a very strategic location because this is the ancient Napoleonic marching route through Minsk and Smolensk all the way to Moscow. So strategic location, and this is the reason why both my grandparents were there, because my grandfather Leon Wencerski was part of the 86th Infantry Regiment that was located in Mołodeczno. So although in peacetime, when my family arrived, when my grandparents arrived, my grandmother from Wilno, just about 30 miles or so, in Lithuania. And as I said, my grandfather arrived. We don't know how he got there, but he was from the Kartuzy area of Poland. So that was quite a big journey for him to make. At that time, it was peacetime. But having said that, it was still quite an unsettled time and a very unsettled area. And as my mother writes in her book, shoots out were frequent, involving smuggling attempts or clandestine forays into the Polish-Soviet border, and very often resulted in deaths. These incidents happened quite often, as there was considerable movement in both directions of spies and smugglers. It was only a few years after the Polish-Soviet War, and life on the border was never without its dangers. But for people like my grandparents, coming to Mołodeczno in the reborn Polish nation, this was a time of opportunity, and people of all kinds of skills were needed to start building up the new Polish nation after the ravages of war. So here they are, Racjana Pokultinis and Leon Wencerski. And they met in Mołodeczno in the early 1920s. They fell in love and they started a family. So Leon rose to the rank of sergeant in the 86th Infantry Regiment, stationed at the garrison in Helenowo, in Mołodeczno's outskirts. He was a very musical young man. His cello, his instrument, which was the one where he was most talented, was the cello, but he also played the cornet, and he was the deputy bandmaster for the regiment. And he also tutored lots of young musicians that were passing through the area. My grandmother, Marciana, a very independent young woman, at the age of 15, she was advised by her parents to go to Petersburg, where her brother was, to keep her safe, because the Germans were just on the outskirts of Wilno. Having got to Petersburg, the Russian Revolution breaks out. And she spent her time there. She worked as in the Red Cross, volunteering there, and she got a typing qualification. So you can get this feeling for this time of opportunity. It didn't hold young women back. Here she was getting a career, getting ready for a career. Sometime, not quite sure of the dates, around about the time of the October Revolution, she was heading back to Vilna because, again, it wasn't safe being where she was. So in a few years later, at the time of the beginning of the peace, she was working in a transport office for the Polish army. Someone turned up from Mołodeczno, we just don't know who he was. A stranger turned up, said, would you like to come and be the administrator of the Mołodeczno State Hospital? And off she went. So I think, this entrepreneurial, spirit of grasping these opportunities, that really characterizes these two young people, very civic-minded and full of purpose. So the early chapters of the book, which are based on my mother's memories, paint a picture of the very vivid cultural life of Mołodeczno, intercultural life. There are many different ethnicities there. And the two little girls who you can see, my mother, Eugenia, on the left, and my aunt, Nusha, on the right there, their lives revolved around these two key places, which were the garrison town, the infantry regiment there, and the hospital where my grandmother was the administrator, and here she is standing here just on the left. And of course, as is a kind of sub-theme of the book, they are actually holding the two dolls there in that picture. While I was editing the book, this image kept coming back to me of the Minsk Gate. I mean, what an extraordinary structure it is. Here it is, literally in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields, this little provincial town. I mean, this is a piece of architecture that could have graced Warsaw or some other major city, and yet here it is. And for me, this embodies something about the Polish spirit, something very courageous and very romantic, and also very rooted in history. And my mother, writing about it, captures the spirit very nicely, I think. You couldn't leave this small and insignificant provincial town on the furthest reaches of eastern Polish border without at least some thoughts of the past evoked by the imposing Minsk Gate. With fields of golden corn on both sides in the summer, for its Polish inhabitants, it was highly symbolic of a precious peace secured by bitter armed struggle. But for two little girls, actually, it was a lovely backdrop for their dolls. I mean, you could imagine them today, with their smartphones, taking that picture. I mean, for them and for their childhood at that time and those interwar years, there must have been something, their whole lives must have seemed so solid, just as solid as this structure, as this monument, enduring, and the whole Polish future shaped in that way as well. But of course, as we know, things don't endure. Miraculously, this particular monument did survive up until the early 1960s, when the Belarusian government demolished it, supposedly because it was too narrow for modern traffic. I think realistically, having this as a reminder of the previous Polish state was probably just a tad uncomfortable. So here's when the change begins. We shift now to September 1939 and the outbreak of war. The two sisters are only just about 11 and 10 years old, and their lives are turned upside down. Their father, Leon, leaves with his regiment for Warsaw, where he'll take part in the bloody battle of Tomaszów Mazowiecki against the Germans. They must have wondered, would they ever see him again? Dreadful time of uncertainty. And of course, while he is away, the Soviets invade Mołodeczno.
Monday, 29th of August 1939, 6 a.m. Father leaves the front. For the first time, the regiment marches in steady ranks through the Minsk Gate's triumphal arch amid family farewells and tears, showered with masses of flowers, making its way to the railway station. Nusha, Evcha, and I visit Father several times that day, bringing him tea. The train departs for Lida when it's already dark, and all that's recognisable are the silhouettes of heavy guns under wraps. 1st of September 1939. Germany attacks Poland. Heavy Polish losses. Enemy planes bomb the rail station in Mołodeczno without causing serious damage, and machine gun groups of children close to the school. We hide in the potato field in the naive belief that we are invisible. Luckily, there are no casualties. Sunday, 16th of September 1939. the Soviet army crossed the Polish frontier. Weak resistance by the Polish troops engaged on the Western Front. News arrives that the Soviets, only about 20 kilometers away, are about to enter Helenovo. The alarm siren wails ominously, and we hide in the cellar. The all clear never sounds, but we come out anyway. There's fear among families, left alone without the protection of their men. Some are hurriedly packing their belongings and try to leave for the railway station. Mama decides to stay and packs our things hurriedly in readiness to leave if the situation becomes serious. We hear sounds of fighting not far from Helenovo. Soviet planes with red stars circle overhead. In the afternoon, Soviet troops enter Helenovo, greeted by Belarusians and some Jews with flowers and ad hoc constructed triumphal arches. Their uniforms are tattered, their horses scraggy and unkempt. The sight frightens us. We're their enemy, the families of soldiers fighting against them. What will happen to us? Will they kill us? The Belarusian population, freed at last from Polish oppression, vent their hatred for the Polish lords and demolish the ballroom of the officers' mess, hacking 2 grand pianos to pieces.
In the months that follow, you can imagine how that tension is building up. We have NKVD authorities taking over the government of Mołodeczno, big changes in the schools where teachers are disappearing and where young people are being appointed into as classroom heads, all sorts of changes which affect the children and the whole family. And of course, very frighteningly, the first waves of deportations begin, targeting the Polish, Jewish, Lithuanian, and Ukrainian populations. These are the enemies of the people. Against the odds, on 12th of October 1939, weak and barely able to stand, their father Leon manages to return home. Thank goodness they're all together. But the family's fears are far from over. It's the eve of the feast of St. Peter, of the Apostles, St. Peter and Paul, 29th of June, 1940. In the middle of the night, the family is woken by pounding on the door. NKVD militiamen give them just 2 hours to pack and leave. And this is how Eugenia describes what happened. News about our deportation spread quickly. Some neighbours gave us bread and salted fat, which we accepted most gratefully. Up until now, we had been calm and purposeful, but when it came to say our goodbyes to Evcha, I could not hold back my tears. In our painful parting, I gave her my old plain doll, and in return, she gave me a silky cream shawl, which came in useful later on. I still have it, now tattered and threadbare, a precious memento of her simple, loving heart. I recall now the last treasured moments of our departure. Pan Władysław, a teacher and our lodger, makes the sign of the cross over our heads. Belongings are loaded onto the lorry, and hurried on by militiamen, we take our seats. My cat, Filutek, walks behind the gate, sensing all is not well. My eyes catch a glimpse of the small figure of Evcha, tearfully waving us, and we are off, never to return to our home in Mołodeczno. We took our places on the wooden bunks, set as double tiers on both sides of the wagon, with just a little space in the middle for our belongings in sacks and bundles. There were about 40 people. We were suffocating in the intense heat. The small windows were partly boarded up and did not let in much air. Only after much protestation did the malicious men remove the boards. At 11 o'clock, the peal of church bells reached us, calling people to High Mass. Our hearts sank with the realization that not only would we not attend Mass, but we might never again return to our homes. We were kept at the station for 2 days, while people continued to be rounded up. Finally, on Monday, 1st of July 1940, just before 6 p.m, the door was bolted from the outside and the train began moving slowly on its journey into the unknown. I managed to secure a little space by the window and remained glued to it, silently sending painful farewells to our native land. We crossed the border at 8 p.m. People prayed tearfully and sang the national anthem. And so their journey began. The family spent 2 days locked inside a stationary cattle wagon in the unbearable June heat before embarking on the tortuously slow transfer across the Soviet Union based on this major railway network that we've highlighted here. Actually, this map is taken from quite a precious memento that we still have. It's taken from Romer's Atlas, 1934, which was my grandfather's, which was one of the books that they had with them. And I can just imagine how my mother must have, especially on their return journey through the Soviet Union, must have been looking at that atlas, looking, understanding where was it that they then landed up, what was the route that they were taking. So they go all the way up into Siberia, into the north, and they come to Kotlas, which is a major railroad junction. And here they're put on a barge to take them north up the River Dvina, which is marked in blue up there, on a journey that takes them virtually all day and all night. And they arrive the next day at the small river port of Siostry. Today it's called Zelennik, on 12th of July. But even then, their journey's not over. Tired, exhausted, hungry, they were made to trudge another 10 kilometers behind a truck, behind a cart that had some of their belongings on, until they got to their final destination. It's the Zharovaya 87 special settlement camp. Certainly there was no special treatment for them or for any of the other deportees who were so violently taken away from their homes. This was the gulag.
We walked and walked behind the carts. It seemed endless. Just at the point when I thought I would never make it, the carter said we were almost there. Indeed, through the vapours rising from the river, mingled with smoke from chimneys, we caught our first glimpse of Zharovaya 87 flame camp. This was our poshowek, that is, a settlement that would be our home for the next 14 months. At the same time, we were assailed by the strong stench of rotting fish. The normal method for preserving fish was to salt it and hang it up to dry in summer months. The settlement consisted of wooden huts arranged in no particular order. There was no need for barbed wire, as we were surrounded on all sides by the thick taiga. I remember my mother telling me that she remembered hearing a man ask one of the guards, "Why is there no barbed wire here?" And the guard just pointed and said, "Where are you going to go?"
So there's no possibility of escape, and immediately on the next day, the adults are put to work.
The morning after our arrival, we were woken by the shouts of the guards, and men and women were ordered out to the forest to work, while we children were left to our own devices. The work was backbreaking. Huge conifers had to be felled with saws and axes, as there was no electricity or electrical equipment in the taiga. Women stripped off the bark with semicircular knives with 2 handles and burnt the branches. Then horses would drag the logs to the river, where in the spring the dangerous work of freeing them from the ice would begin. The timber would float down the river, surging with the meltwater. For camp use, logs were cut to size and arranged in stacks. The guards kept daily records of the work done. This went on relentlessly, regardless of weather conditions: rain, deep snow, or sharp frost.
When they arrive, it's still summertime. And in fact, some of the passages in the book, in this chapter, capture some of the beauty of the place. But nonetheless, even in the summer, the conditions were quite harsh with lots of flies and mosquitoes. And during the summertime, at least they get some nutrition because they can pick berries and they can pick mushrooms. But when winter comes, it's really no joke at all.
Arhangelsk is an extremely cold region with average winter temperatures of -40 degrees centigrade. Huge trees, frozen to the core, would burst with a loud crack. Only once, when the temperature fell to -52 centigrade, did the guards let people stay indoors. The winter clothes issue consisted of a padded jacket called a kupaika and trousers. and to complete the outfit were valenki, knee-high felt boots which, with feet wrapped in cloths, gave a degree of warmth, but were not very practical in wet weather, especially when the thaw came. Needless to say, none of this was free, and the cost was deducted from our paltry wages.
Actually, I found it quite hard to find photographs that were freely available of this particular area, but I did find this painting by Ivan Glazunov, First Snow on the Dwina, and it certainly does capture some of that harsh beauty. But for people working outdoors in all temperatures, their health began to fail, and really it was getting to be an impossible task to survive the winter. But spring did arrive, and it arrived late in May. For the inhabitants of the penal colony, it only brought new challenges.
On 15th of May, the frozen waters of the Siostry burst open with a loud boom and crashes. The force of massive flows and the swift currents smashed the bridge. The snow was thawing. This heralded a busy time for the men in our camp, as well as the other rafting camps. Logs and large trunks floating down the river often formed impenetrable jams. The men with grappling hooks had to perform incredible feats of agility, concentration, and presence of mind, jumping from log to log to pull them free and break up the congestion. It was dangerous work, particularly as the men were no longer young and were hardly in the best of health.
So the rest of the chapter gives a lot of really amazing detailed information about the life of the camp, about their activities there. And yes, it paints quite a vivid picture of that. And of course, it must have seemed never-ending for them. They were hungry all the time, completely malnourished. And then, something changes, at long last. On 12th of August 1941, when an agreement was signed between the Polish government in exile in London and the Soviet ambassador, Iwan Majski, it allowed for the release of Polish citizens held in the USSR and the formation of the Polish army, this is Anders' army, in Uzbekistan, to fight alongside the Soviets against their new enemy, Germany. So this is the so-called amnesty. And what an amazing piece of paper this is, this little crumbling, fragile, yellowed piece of paper. It carries a huge weight of history. And for the Bensersky family, the emotional weight that it carried must have been phenomenal. After months of captivity, this amnesty meant freedom. Peter, can you give us a flavour of what happened around that time?
So, hundreds of thousands of Polish men, women and children, many of them orphans, started making their way south to join the army and to seek its protection. A Polish embassy was set up in Kubyshev. Many Soviet towns and cities became military bases. In these bigger towns, Polish delegations, relief centres were set up to help and direct the flood of Polish refugees released by the amnesty. These people were emaciated and suffering from severe malnutrition. They were physically exhausted after spending some 2 years in forced labour camps in a harsh and unforgiving climate. Dressed in rags, more often than not with bare feet. Many died on the journey. Many succumbed to typhus, malaria or dysentery. The army centres could not cope with this tide of humanity, and the Soviet government was deaf to its plight. General Anders made the compassionate decision to share the meagre army rations with these poor people.
Eventually, on 21st September 1941, after weeks of delay and hesitation from the camp commandant, who tried to persuade them to stay, he even suggested they should buy a cow and settle. Can you imagine? The Bensersky family finally set out on the last and most perilous leg of their journey across the Soviet Union. This journey would take nearly 3.5 months to complete, and it almost cost Eugenia her life, as she contracted infantile polio and typhoid. Although sustained by the hope of their eventual freedom, the family endured extraordinary hardships along the way, and these are vividly described in chapter 11 of the book. And these last two chapters, chapter 11 and chapter 10, are based on her diary that she wrote when she eventually got to Isfahan and to safety. So she was referring to that as she wrote these passages. Their harrowing and seemingly pointless voyage up and down the Amudarya River in Uzbekistan. Sorry, I should push that side here. So just here marked in blue, you can see the journey that they made, the tortuous journey all the way across. And then they went up the Amudarya River to Nukus, and then they were sent back down again. And in between times, they were on trains that were shunting up and down the railway system, the Soviets just not knowing what to do with them. But this harrowing and seemingly pointless voyage up and down the Amudarya River in Uzbekistan on a disease-ridden barge captures the chaos of that time.
On Stalin's orders, the train carrying Polish people did not stop at the Polish army centres, and we spent weeks going aimlessly backwards and forwards. Finally, on 30th November 1941, we were again in Nukus, from where we were loaded onto a barge to begin the second nightmare journey back to Kresy. We were assigned to the hold. It was a horrible, dark and smelly hole with people packed in like cattle. The filthy bilge water under the floorboards kept slopping from side to side, perfect breeding ground for infections. It was an indescribable hell and an utter degradation of human dignity. During the day, we ventured out onto the deck. The primitive and dirty toilet was not sufficient for so many people. The sight of the Amudarya did nothing to soothe our tormented souls, as water usually does. Its brown and muddy waves hit the barge with a menacing force.
Eventually, they were placed in Bukhara, a bit further along there, where the family were put to work in the kolkhoz, just outside Bukhara and Kogon. Their work was cotton picking, and when the cotton picking ran out, even the children were put to work removing the salt-encrusted soil of that area so that there could be farming. And when the work stopped, the money stopped, and there was no food. There was starvation.
We were in a desperate situation. All the work in the fields had finished, and that meant only one thing: no food. While we still had something to sell or barter, Mama would go to the market in Kagan, bring back some flatbread, not unlike Peter, or some butter in a bottle, or even a handful of small, sweet, dried apricots. But the Uzbeks were not very keen on selling us these goods, because they needed them for themselves. Here, our beloved little dolls, with plates and long lashes, were exchanged for much-needed food.
And here they were reduced to eating cattle fodder with absolutely zero nutritional value. And it seemed like this could be the end for them. In the meanwhile, their father, Leon, had gone to enlist with the Polish army. And actually, luckily, fortune did smile on them because he came back just in time. He returned to the kolkhoz wearing a smart uniform provisioned by the British Army. He shook hands with the commandant, handed over papers, and they were allowed to leave. And here they were on their journey from Krasnovodsk, at the edge of the Caspian Sea, to Paklevi.
We embarked quickly, fearful that the Soviet authorities might turn us away at the last moment. It was a fishing boat packed to capacity. Every square inch of space was taken. We were allocated a cabin, but this did not make our voyage any easier. It was stuffy and full of quarrelling people. Sleep was impossible in these conditions. The sick were put on the floor to rest, and so it was standing room only. There were only a few primitive toilets, scarcely enough for this crowd, many of whom were suffering from diarrhea. Nusha and I escaped onto the deck, where at least there was fresh air. But to add to our misery, the sea became choppy. Many people became seasick. We spent the night in these dreadful conditions. In the morning light, we could discern the contours of docks and houses, and soon we docked on Persian soil in Paklevi. On the beach, along the Caspian Sea, there was a medical tent, makeshift shelters with showers and disinfection points. From now on, we were under the protection of the Polish civil delegation, the British legation in Tehran, and the American Red Cross.
They were safe. But Colonel Ross, who was the British person responsible for all of the refugees arriving in Pahlavi, his report is quite shocking. In a successful effort to get as many Poles away from Krasnovodsk in the shortest possible time, the Russians packed the evacuees on board until it was impossible to move. Sanitary conditions passed all belief. On the largest tankers, there were about 6 lavatories to serve 4,000 or 5,000 persons. Only the fact that the Poles were inured to all kinds of hardship by their 2.5 years in the Soviet Union enabled them to endure this journey. Sobering. But the book ends on a very positive note, with huge gratitude to the people of Persia who took them in and who showed them enormous kindness. And although they had suffered so much, what continued on in their hearts, and what we will hear shortly from my aunt, Totya Nusha, Maciek and Witek's mother, is happy memories, happy thoughts about that time. And our aunt recorded a video for us to play today, just a few months after her 96th birthday.
My name is Anna Brzeski. My parents' names are Leon and Marciana Węcerski, and we arrived in Pahlavi in 1943, and I was 14 then. We were able to take our belongings with us and leave it all on the beach, and then the Polish embassy in Tehran arranged for us to be looked after. We were very weak and very happy to arrive in the very country. My father, Leon, left to join the army, and the transport was arranged for him. There were many people like him who wanted to join the army. We were happy because he was joining the army and fight for the release of Poland. My mother was assigned a job as administrator, and the children were put into groups, and we were transported to Isfahan. We were given accommodation by the nuns. Persian people were very kind to us, and they tried to make our life easy and looking normal. And they also provided us with accommodation. Some of the very rich ones gave their summer houses in the beautiful gardens. We were assigned teachers to teach us in Polish and history and other subjects. I found it easy to adjust to school life, and we are very happy to join the school. We're very keen to join the choir and lead almost normal life. We found it easy to adjust to normal life because our life was very busy. Apart from lectures, we had a lot of activities. We were very happy to go on our excursions and journeys on the bicycles. Also, going by bus to Baalbek and other places of historical interest. Girl Guides was very important in our lives. We used to go excursions, and also we did some performing. We did first aid. We learned also skills like surviving and self-sufficiency and socializing, a lot of singing, and that's kept our spirits alive. I was able to learn how to drive in an army truck, which was quite challenging, but also very exciting. And the place that we were learned to drive was very close to the cemetery, and it was very poignant and quite funny. When I arrived in England, a few years later, I joined the WI, and the members there asked me to give the presentation of my life through the years of war. So that was very revealing, because nobody knew of the horrors we came through. I was asked to give presentation in schools about my life and journey. The children were very dismayed through the horrors that they came through. After some years, when I was recollecting on my life, my very happy memories were from Persia, and because the people there, it was a very happy period for all the children, because people there showed their sympathy and understanding.
I was just going to say a few words. My mother obviously isn't here to give this the talk, and every year there are fewer and fewer of that remarkable generation of survivors. So these are very precious memories, and they should be captured and shared for the future. Just going forward after Persia and Isfahan and Zuk, they spent most of the time in Isfahan and then a brief period in Zuk at the Polish school before they were able to sail for England. It was thanks to the education and support to the child refugees over those 4 years by the Polish communities in Isfahan and Zuk that Eugenia and Anna were completed their advanced level education. When they arrived in England, they were very well equipped to strive for and secure scarce university places normally reserved for men returning from the war. But first they had to take mundane factory work while they studied in evening classes to improve their English. Anna went on to graduate in domestic science in London and Eugenia in French history and supplementary education at Dublin University. Those formative years in the Middle East instilled in them the resilience and strength of character to face yet another relocation to a foreign country impacted by the war, and saw them through their adult and professional lives. Anna helped her husband run his business while bringing up the family home. She's a remarkable cook and administrator. Eugenia went on to teach at Divine Mercy College in Fawley Courts, the Polish boys' school set up in England, in Henley-on-Thames. After the school closed, she worked there for another 3 years as a secretary, helping to run the retreat, which replaced the school. And then even after retiring at 74, she continued voluntarily to help with administrative and translation matters for the Marian fathers.
I feel very proud and quite emotional today to be standing here wearing this, which is the Siberian cross for Krajewskie, which was my mother's. There's a huge weight of history that falls on the children of the deportees, but it's also an enormous honour to remember them. And I think the book has got this theme of memory sort of running all the way through it. It starts at the beginning with it and it ends with it. And I just finished with a very short little piece, which is at the end of the book, which comes from this little precious autograph book, which it survived from Mołodeczno, it survived with other little mementos during the time in Russia and Siberia, with this rather lovely woodcut here, traditional Polish woodcut, and its various autographs. And you can imagine the date is so significant. Between September 1939, December 1939, there are other dates here as well. During that time, the little girls were gathering little sayings and autographs from their friends. And the one that I chose to put in at the end of the book, which I've loosely translated into English, goes like this. When you leave our little schoolhouse for distant lands and distant sky, dearest Eugenia, don't forget your childhood friend from days gone by. And that's dated 23rd of September 1939. And we should not forget, and that is the point of the book, to share that history and to share that experience. So, thank you very much.